Hello there, and welcome to a bonus episode of Forza Top Gear Laps. So, the Last Cars Part 2 was intended to be the final episode of Season 5. However, as I started looking through the car list, I noticed that there was a fair few cars on that list that really should be given a fair shake around the track, but for one reason or another, they've been overlooked previously. These are those cars. These are the Outliers. Now, I will say, most of these cars come from the vintage GT racing category in-game. There's not a whole lot of variety here. It's mostly older race cars. However, I didn't think it'd be fair to not give them a fair shake, and a lot of them are pretty unique, as we'll find out today. And we begin with the 1934 Alfa Romeo P3, 285 horsepower, 300 foot-pound torque, 1,653 pounds of weight. This is a very old Grand Prix racing car, and in fact, at 1934, it's one of the oldest cars we've ever had go around the track. I believe it's this, the Bugatti Type 35. There's a couple of Fords from 1932, but other than that, I think that's pretty much it for cars that are older than this. So yeah, very, very old car, as you can see. And actually pretty good statistically, 285 horsepower, 300 foot-pound torque. There's the sort of numbers you'd expect to get from a mid-range sports coupe. And they're in this with its very, very Neanderthalic sort of look. And that's kind of where we're going on this one. It is modern day fast. It is a quick car, this. However, it has 145 tyres, and they offer no grip whatsoever, as you'd expect. It drives as you would expect it to drive. It is very fast. It just doesn't do anything else, really. Consider this a slightly toned down version of cars like the Auto Union Type D, you know, the older Formula 1 cars that have about 500 brake horsepower. Those are very fast with no grip. This is kind of fast with slightly less grip. It's sort of like a miniature version of those, except it looks a lot cooler and different and weird. Next up, a 1948 Ferrari 166mm Barchetta, 138 horsepower, 117 foot-pound torque, 1,433 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful and least torquey car we have here today. And it starts to begin a little bit of theme, as you'll see in today's episode, of cars that look absolutely horrified or just have weird faces in general. The Barchetta appears to have had a bad lunch, or maybe you think that's a giant mustache. Either way, it's not really a looker, the 166mm. This car, I believe, was introduced in Horizon 3 as a barn find, and it's never really been much of a note in the community since then. I can't really think of anyone who considers this to be a great addition. It's just sort of there. And the only thing I can really tell about this car historically is I believe the MM stands for Mille Miglia. So it obviously raced in that, although how well it did, I'm not 100% sure. I think it may have got second, I read somewhere a while ago. Anyways, as far as it goes to drive, well, it's actually quick-ish for 138 horsepower because it doesn't weigh a whole lot. However, this has even smaller tyres than the Alfa Romeo 140, and they provide really no grip whatsoever. You just turn it in, you get nothing, and as soon as you come out, you just have to try and control the power. It hasn't got all that much power, but these tyres just have not got a lot of rubber, so trying to keep this one in check is a handful I wouldn't recommend. Next up, 1953 Ferrari 500 Mondial, 168 horsepower, 155 foot-pound torque, 1,852 pounds of weight. The 500 Mondial is actually famous. I believe this was sort of one of the very first four-cylinder Ferraris. The Mondial sort of name essentially used to mean four-cylinder in Ferrari speak. And that's what these cars were. There was a few iterations before this, however, this is one of them. Again, I believe this may have been a Mille Miglia car and raced in some of the GT Sports Car Championships back in the day. This car, unlike the 166mm, does not look horrified. It actually looks quite happy with itself. A very happy looking car. A little bit weird looking though, because the ride height on this is actually quite high looking. It's got a weird sort of appearance to it, you know, it's a very sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Wide, short car, but the ride height's quite tall. It's a bit strange. As far as it goes to drive though, it's got a reason to look happy because it's actually a good car to drive. Surprisingly grippy, this one. This is more what I was expecting from this episode. I was expecting to get cars that are actually surprisingly nice to drive, and this is one of them. Yeah, surprisingly grippy. I can imagine this car would actually be quite good with a fair few upgrades thrown in it. Obviously I'd still increase the tyre size. I don't know what the tyre size is on this, but considering I haven't written it down, I'm assuming it's not ridiculous. But yeah, give the 500 Mondial a go. if you want something a little bit different. Next up, a 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR, 310 horsepower, 234 foot-pound torque, 1,984 pounds of weight. This is a car which competed at Le Mans. You'll see quite a few of these today. It sort of begins a little bit of a trend towards cars that have competed at Le Mans. The 300 SLR, very successful sports car racer. This one run races all around the globe and championships with Sterling Moss and so on at the wheel. However, unfortunately for the 300 SLR, it's not really known for that. It's more notorious for the 1955 Le Mans disaster, in which it killed 83 people by going over a fence into a bunch of spectators. It's kind of hard to have a good reputation when that is sort of in your past. However, the 300 SR in-game at least is actually a great car to drive. Really like this one actually, especially after driving stuff like the Barchetta. This was, yeah, a great car. It feels really good, you get a nice amount of grip, a little bit of front end lift. Was not expecting that from this car, but that is what it has. But other than that, yeah, this is another car where it does feel like if you put some tyres, some new brakes on this, and maybe sorted out that front end lift, this could also work wonders for lobby racing. Next up, 1957 Maserati 300S, 260 horsepower, 247 foot-pound torque, 2,120 pounds of weight. Straight away, you can sort of see the issue when it got away from the line. This 300S has a bit of an issue I'd run into with a few cars here today. However, the 300S by far had it the worst, and that is gearboxes. A lot of these cars, because of the nature of the way they were raced, the first gears are incredibly long. I can usually deal with that to an extent. However, the 300S probably has the worst first gear ratio I've ever dealt with in a car on this game. Just cutting into the chase, it'll do 95 miles per hour in first gear, and that's not even all it has to give. It's ridiculous first gear. It'll just stall the line. I can't even imagine what this thing's like to drive with manual clutch. I bet it's awful. Once you get it going, however, it's okay. It's a little bit soft. It's not got quite as much grip as maybe you'd like it to. It's just sort of an averagey car beyond that, but the gearbox for this really does kill it. If you are going to do anything involving the 300S, just junk the stock gearbox, because, yeah, that first gear is just atrocious. In general, the gears themselves, I don't think I went above third at any point during this. I don't think I even got into third for anything other than the longest straight, so, yeah, chuck the gearbox out and it might be a semi-decent car, I guess. Next up, 1958 Aston Martin DBR1, 254 horsepower, 247 foot-pound torque, 1,930 pounds of weight. Another Le Mans car, this one actually a Le Mans winner in 1959, which makes it curious as to why it's the 1958 version in-game, but that's what we've got. Of course, another sports car racer because it did compete in Le Mans. I'm not sure how successful it did over its sports car career, but of course, a win at the 24 Hours of Le Mans is pretty darn impressive, and it would be Aston Martin's only win to this day, although it's safe to say they haven't really tried all that much. They've had a few GT racing cars, a couple of prototypes, not solely built by them, but yeah, I guess they haven't fully committed to a Le Mans win since this point. As far as the DBR1 goes to drive, it's very slidey. That's the first thing I noticed, so if you're a bit of a drifter and you want to show up to your next drift meet in something that isn't a BMW M3, then maybe the DBR1's worth a good shout. But to the rest of us, other than that, it's decent to drive, certainly. Nowhere near as bad as that 300S. Just be aware that the rear end doesn't have all that much grip, and you like this car. If you're more of an oversteer person than an understeer person, you'll probably get along with the DBR1 quite well, so yeah. Maybe worth a shout if you're looking for something a little bit different, especially if you're a drifter like I mentioned. Next up, probably the weirdest looking car in the entire game, 1961 Maserati Tipo 61 Birdcage, 250 horsepower, 228 foot-pound torque, 1,323 pounds of weight, and this is actually the lightest car we have here today. The Birdcage is something. From the front end it looks absolutely horrified, and then it's got these weird arches, you've got the whole birdcage, roll cagey thing going on, and then the rear end really does look like a bathtub. It's a weird looking car, the Tipo Birdcage. Some people may call it beautiful, I'm gonna call it bizarre. would be my way. Maybe one of the weirdest looking cars in the entire game. In terms of history, this car is essentially something Maserati built for privateers to run at Le Mans, and it did do a few times, although how successful it was, I'm not sure. As far as it goes to drive, it is very slidey and very, very fast. Yeah, another car which maybe drift meets, you know, show up in this, you'll certainly get a few looks. But yeah, very quick, actually quite enjoyable to drive, not a bad vehicle, and I think these are actually quite quick, with some upgrades, if you can get around the absolutely bizarre looks of the thing. Next up, my personal favourite car here today, 1965 Shelby Cobra Daytona, 390 horsepower, 341 foot-pound torque, 2,300 pounds of weight. And this is by far and away the most powerful car we have here today, by far and away the torquiest car we have here today, and it's the heaviest car we have here today, which at 2,300 pounds is, yeah, that sort of shows you what this episode is all about when 2,300 pounds is your heaviest car. I love the Cobra Daytona. It looks really good, although the rear end once again a little bit weird. This is the car, fun fact, that actually is the reason why we in England have a speed limit on our motorways, because they decided to test this thing on the M1, I believe, and it did 190 miles per hour, and after that they imposed speed limits because they said this damn speed, and we've had it ever since, so we hate the Cobra for that. However, we can't stay mad at the Cobra because of the way it looks, because it's terrific, especially now in Forza they got rid of the racing livery, replaced it with these racing stripes. I really do quite like it. As far as it goes to drive, it is quite boaty. It does have pretty decent grip. The tyres on this certainly are not small. It will do 85 miles per hour in first gear, however, unlike the Maserati 300S, this does actually have torque and power, so it can get away from the line, which is the important part if you're going to have a ridiculously long first gear. Next up, 1966 Porsche 906 Carrera 6, 210 horsepower, 144 foot-pound torque, 1,360 pounds of weight. I've got to say, when this was added to Forza, I was very curious about the 906 Carrera. Here we have a car which is mid-A class, but it only has 210 horsepower, but it only weighs 1,360 pounds. On paper, that seems like it's going to be an absolute whirlwind to drive. This thing's going to be absolutely incredible. We'll get to that in a second. 906 sports car, slightly strange looking thing. I did actually do a build of this when I put it to R class, which was quite fun. But other than that, I don't know all that much about this car. As far as it goes to drive, it's just hugely quick. Insanely quick. I know it's only got 210 horsepower, but you know, top speed's good. The amount of cornering speed you can take in this is insane. It isn't an easy car to drive. It certainly will catch you out. Sometimes it will go around that corner at 110 miles an hour, no problem. Other times you won't get around it at 90. However, if you can get this thing right, this is like Aerial Atom of A class. It's just stupid quick. And finally today, one of my favourite cars that they've added in DLC, because it's so strange yet so likeable, the 1967 Nissan R380, 217 horsepower, 155 foot-pound torque, 1,411 pounds of weight. So a slight bit of history, this isn't really a Nissan. It was originally called the Prince R380, and then Nissan bought the Prince brand fully, rebadged this as the Nissan R380 2, and then it did a few sports car events. It actually went against the 906 Carrera 6 at Fuji Speedway for some form of race at some point. First time round in 1966, the 906 won. In 1967, the R380 won. Of course, on paper, it's not as quick as the 906, and in game, it certainly isn't on the 906 level. However, it isn't that bad a car to drive. It's okay. The one thing, this car really caught me out. It is incredibly understeery. I don't know if it's the tyres or the suspension setup, but yeah, a hell of a lot of understeer, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting this thing to be quite lively, kind of a little bit like the 906 to drive, but yeah, no, just very understeery. Okay, I guess, if you can tune that understeer out of it, you probably have a good car on your hands, but yeah, a weird car to drive. For the final time then, onto the times. In 104th place we find the Porsche 906 Carrera 6 117.853, which is really quick. Beats out a Nissan GT-R Black Edition, beats out a Ferrari FF 360 Challenge Dali, and telling you, the 906 A640, the PI of that car, and it's beating S-Class cars. Aerial atom of A-Class, really is. In 138th place, the Nissan R380 with a 119.942, another actually quite quick time. That car is B570, and it's beating out some low to mid-tier A-Class cars, but that understeer is just something you're going to have to decide whether you can actually deal with or not. In 147th place, we found the Maserati T-Boat 61 Birdcage with a 120.346, goes in between an E63 AMG and a Viper GTS ACR, beats out a modern day RS6 Avant, beats out an Auto Union Type D, so the Birdcage goes into an interesting spot, about as interesting as the way it looks. In 167th place, we find the Shelby Cobra Daytona with a 121.041, beats out an Elise, goes in between an Elise Sport 190 and a Corvette ZR1, beats out a Ferrari 250 LM, which I guess is the closest thing to that car on the board. Daytona didn't do too bad. In 189th place, we find the Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR with a 121.812, goes in between an Urus Concept and an RWB Porsche. Beats out a Porsche 904 Carrera GTS. Other than that, though, it's right around a bunch of modern sports cars, so the 300 SLR certainly doesn't do too bad at all. In 224th place, we find the Alfa Romeo P3 with a 122.819. Considering its age, that is an incredible time. I believe that's the quickest pre-1935 car we've had. Yeah, it's right up there. It's only a thousandth of a second off of a Ferrari 512 Testarossa, so yeah, really well done. In 253rd place, we find the Aston Martin DBR1 with a 124.042. Beats out a Chrysler 300C and a HSV Commodore, and slightly slower than a BMW E39 M5. I don't think anyone really expected to ever say that in the history of man. In 327th place, despite its gearbox, the Maserati 300S with a 126.650. That actually did a hell of a lot better than I was expecting. Well, that gearbox, I was expecting it to be well down, but yeah, I mean, it beats out an Elise 111S, but the PI of the Elise is so much lower. In 403rd place, we find the Ferrari 500 Mondial with a 129.276, goes in between a Hyundai Veloster and a Mazda MX-5. So a four-cylinder from 1953 is right around where a bunch of sort of modern-day four-cylinder cars are. Well done, I guess. And finally, in 447th place, the Ferrari 166mm Barchetta with a 130.717, goes in between a Lotus 11, which is quite apt, and a Subaru SVX, perhaps less so. Yeah, the Barchetta didn't do too bad, but I think it'd be a lot quicker if it didn't have 150 sized tyres. So, that's it for this bonus edition of Forza Top Gear Laps, and now there's no more loose ends, there's no more playing around with it. That is Season 5 of Forza Top Gear Laps in the books. That's done. Next episode, which is coming out tomorrow, which quite aptly is on the 3rd of October, which would have been exactly 3 years since this series started. We'll be doing the full leaderboard as per usual, but yeah, I want to thank you all very much for supporting the series for 3 years. That's insane how long I've been doing this and how drawn out it's been. We've had a lot of stopgaps, but yeah, it's been fun. And it's been amazing to see the support on this. What happens to Forza Top Gear Laps in the future, I do not know. But what I do know is it's been a wild ride, and I hope you've enjoyed. And yeah, it's kind of weird. It's sort of a feeling of relief, yet a slight feeling of sadness to say goodbye to this series for now. But we shall see what the future brings. So, thank you all very much for watching, and farewell.
You know what I feel. The sorrow that my heart holds in, knowing just where my hopes and dreams are going. I won't let you be. Got up in a war that you are not part of. Eyes on the slit of your father with love.